Aaron Kelly was dead. To tell you the truth, nobody much cared. You see, Aaron Kelly was so darn right mean and ornery all his life that folks was glad to see him go. Even his widow never shed a tear. She just bought a coffin, put Aaron in, and buried him. Goodbye, Aaron Kelly, good riddance. But that night, Aaron Kelly got up out of his coffin, pushed the lid aside, got out of the grave, and started going home. Well, his widow was sitting in the parlor thinking how nice and peaceful it was without old Aaron around, when he walked right in the door. "What's the matter with you, woman?" he said. "You're dressed all in black. You look like somebody died. Who's dead?" His widow pointed at him and said, "You's dead." "Oh, no, I ain't," said Aaron. "I don't feel dead. I feel fine." "You don't look fine," said his widow. "You look dead. Why don't you go on back to that coffin where you belong?" "Oh, no," said Aaron. "I ain't going back to no coffin till I feels dead." He was downright ornery. What could his widow do? If Aaron didn't go back to the grave, then the undertaker would come and take away the coffin. And well, if Aaron didn't go back to the grave, then she couldn't collect the life insurance money. And if she couldn't collect the life insurance money, then she couldn't pay the undertaker for the coffin. And if she couldn't pay the undertaker for the coffin, he might just take that coffin away, and then she'd never be rid of Aaron. Do you think Aaron cared?
No.
He didn't care. He just sat down in his favorite rocking chair and rocked. Back and forth, day after day, night after night. And after a while, old Aaron began to dry up. Why, his hair, didn't have much, but what was left of his hair just kind of fell from his skull and kind of floated to the ground. His skin began to flake off and fall into like clouds around the rocking chair that he was sitting in, and his muscles tightened up like rubber bands, twang, 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 and his heart and his liver and his kidneys and eyeballs fell on the ground, boing, 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 boing. Pretty soon, there wasn't nothing left of old Aaron, nothing except a raggedy old skeleton just sitting there rocking back and forth, day after day, night after night. Well, what could the widow do? If Aaron didn't go back, she didn't know what to do. It was very difficult, too, to have to clean up all that mess that kept floating down on the ground around Aaron. But one day, the best fiddle player in town came to call on Aaron's widow. He'd heard that Aaron had died, and he thought he might just marry that widow himself. Well, the fiddle player knocked on the door, and Aaron's wife opened the door. When she saw who it was, she kind of smiled, and he smiled at her, and she looked at him, and he smiled at her, and then she invited him in, and they sat down on the sofa in the parlor and kept looking at each other, kind of cozy like. She looked, and he looked, and she looked, and he looked. After a while, Aaron said, "Fiddle player, this ain't any fun at all. Take out your fiddle. I feels like dancing." Well, the fiddle player said, "How can I court you proper with an old bag of bones sitting there?" And the widow shrugged, and the clock ticked, and Aaron kept snapping his bones. Says, "Fiddle player, take out that fiddle. I feels like dancing." Well, the fiddle player, he took out his fiddle, and he rosined up the bow. He tucked that fiddle up under his chin, and he began to play. Oh, he could play some sweet music. He could make that fiddle sing. And old Aaron, he just couldn't sit still. He started snapping his fingers and knocking his knees together, and then he stood up and cracked his knuckle bones. And then old Aaron began to dance, with his toe bones tapping and his arm bones clapping, round and around. He danced like a fool, with his finger bones tapping and his knee bones knocking. Boy, could that dead man dance! Wow, the music got louder and got wilder, and Aaron's dancing got louder. All of a sudden, one of the bones broke loose from the skeleton, flew through the air and clattered to the ground. Look at that, said the fiddle player. He's dancing so hard, he's falling apart. Play louder, said his widow. So the fiddle player, he played louder, and those bones kept popping every which way. Play faster, said the widow. Well, that fiddle player, he tucked that fiddle up under his chin. He fiddled a tune that made the bed bugs hop. He fiddled a tune that made the rocks get up and dance. Down and back, clickety clack. Old Aaron kept a hopping, his thigh bones popping, clipping and a flopping. He just kept a popping until pretty soon there was nothing left of old Aaron. Nothing except his bald old yellow head bone. And that looked up at the fiddle player and said, "Woo-wee! Ain't we having fun?" Well, that was just too much for the fiddle player. He dropped his fiddle and he said, "Woman, I'm getting out of here." And he ran out the door. Well, Aaron's widow picked up all of Aaron's bones and put them in her apron and took them back to the graveyard and put them back in the coffin. And she mixed the bones up real good so he couldn't put himself back together again. And she put the lid back on the coffin and she went back home. Now they say, if you're ever out in that graveyard somewhere in Tennessee or North Carolina, and there's a big full moon outside, and somewhere in the summertime, June, July, you might hear a faint clicking and clacking underground. Just old Aaron trying to put himself back together again. And what about the fiddle player? And Aaron's widow? They never did get back together again. Aaron Kelly made dead sure of that. So another fun thing, you guys know that you have good imaginations and you can imagine that, but I wanted to show you this picture book where the story came from, by Cynthia DeFelice. The Boy Who Knew Cats have really pretty illustrations. These are kind of, I don't know, not so great, in my opinion. So here's Aaron and the widow and the fiddle player. And here's the fiddle, oh here, I'll show you Aaron dancing here. Here he is kind of dancing. And here's the widow kind of putting those, how many of you imagine the widow looked like this? Yeah, how many of you thought she was young? Well, I guess she's kind of young, it's hard to tell. How many thought maybe she was pretty? Anyway, here's the fiddle player. Here it is. Here's the widow just putting the bones back together again in the graveyard. So I'm going to do one other thing with you, but I thought I'd give you a chance to ask me some questions about storytelling first, before we go on to the last thing that I want to do. But yes?
Are you one of the best storytellers?
Am I what?
One of the best storytellers?
Am I one of the best storytellers? Of course! Of course! There are lots of really, really wonderful storytellers. Storytellers have all different kinds of styles, and they tell all different kinds of stories. Most of the stories that I come from books or from folklore, but there are many storytellers who just tell the stories about themselves or about people from history. I like to think I'm one of the better ones in Michigan, but I don't know about the best in the country. Yes?
Why did you choose to do storytelling?
Because I get to meet wonderful people like you. I was a school librarian for many, many years, and I would tell stories to my elementary kids, and they liked it. But then I was transferred to the middle school, and I thought, well, they won't want to hear stories because they're big kids. They were all bigger than me. I'm not real tall, so they were all taller than me. And I thought, oh, they won't like my stories. But they kept saying, Mrs. Sima, can't you tell us some stories? So one year, right before Christmas vacation, I invited all the language arts classes into the library, and I told them some stories. And guess what?
They liked them.
They liked the stories too. And so that got me excited about storytelling. And I had a student storytelling club for 17 years, and that's what I shared with your teacher and some other teachers here in Jackson. And now that I'm retired, I go to schools and places all over the country and tell stories. Other questions? Yes?
Have you told a story like out of the country before?
I did a workshop in Windsor, Canada once, but I haven't really been out of the country. Not yet. Yes?
What type of stories do you like to tell the best, like scary stories?
Well, I guess my favorite are ghost stories. Because I can make kids jump, or I can make, like with the Boy Who Drew Cats. It's not really a ghost story, but it's kind of quiet and people. I also like to tell stories where I get the audience to participate and join in with me. So. And I also have a story that I tell about my mother when she escaped from Germany during World War II. And to me, it's a story that I created in her memory. So to me, that's a real special story. Well, I'm going to tell you another story, and I'm going to give you a chance to learn how to tell that story yourself, because I'm only telling it to you. And would you like to learn a scary story?
Yeah!
So this is a story we're going to learn how to tell. I'll tell it, and then we're going to kind of go through some steps so that you can learn to tell it, and then you can scare your friends and family, and whatever you want to do with it will be yours. Okay?
Teacher.
So the man who wrote the story